everybody, so this is video 2. I'm basically going to show you how I start an embroidery project. In this case it's a sample for a new pattern. I've put the fabric on and I've stretched it so that it's nice and tight, kind of like a drum. And I made sure that my grain is square so that the threads going this way are perpendicular to the threads going that way. And just doing the final little recheck, make sure it's really nice and snug here, and then I tighten it as much as I can without breaking my hoop, of course. And I've got my needle. I've picked out my colors of embroidery floss. I've got my handy scissors handy, and I've got my transfer already printed on the stick and wash away transfer sheets, and I cut it out. See, I leave a little bit of a border, and that way I have room for it to stick down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out where I want to put it, and I think it's going to go about here. Yeah. So all I do is I peel it off and I stick it kind of where I want it, right there, and I lightly just brush it on. Then I flip it over, and you can do this next little bit of a trick with your fingernail or a bone folder or the back of a spoon. Just, I kind of really press it in, and I go basically back and forth. Notice I'm doing this on the back side of the fabric, and I press it really hard this way, and the hoop is basically upside down so that the fabric is flat against the table. And doing this really helps that transfer sheet stick in place. And get around that corner a little bit, and then I usually go at an angle, and then come back, get it that way, and then maybe I'll run it real quick this way. And this just really helps keep the transfer magic in place and keeps it from peeling up and doing weird things. So now I'm going to start with the outer lines of my design, and I'm going to basically take 2 threads, because I'm always doing 2 threads at a time unless I'm doing really fine lines or really thick lines. But for most lines I'm stitching with 2 threads. Embroidery floss comes with 6. You can see there's 2. So give it a little lick and thread your needle, and I run it through. Now, because I have it on these nice little bobbins, it does help me keep organized, and it does keep them from getting tangled, but it does give me these kinks. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very lightly wet it with, Nature's Miracle spit. Not a lot, just a little bit. And then I tie my knot. And I do kind of like a floating French knot. And I make a loop, not a noose. Make a loop, going like this. And I wrap the needle a few times, depending on how big of a knot you need. I kind of pinch it and I slide it off, and then I pull it tight. And it gives me just enough of a little end so that the knot doesn't undo itself, but not so much that I have half the thread on the back. And I'm just going to start right about here, because I don't like knots too close to intersections. And for this first part, I want to really make sure that my transfer isn't going to go anywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stitch around the edge with a running stitch and then go back and hit in between the stitches. Sometimes it's called a reverse running stitch, and sometimes it's called a Holbein stitch. Whatever you call it, it does its magic. You could also do a back stitch or a forward back stitch. I just like the Holbein stitch because it looks a little bit neater on the back side. It lays flatter, and it's just much more convenient for a lot of the things that I stitch. Anyway, so I'm going to do, oh, I got a knot. That happens. There we go. Undid it. That happens. Don't worry. It happens to everybody. So I'm just going to stitch on the line. And you'll notice that with the majority of my patterns, the line is actually about the same thickness as the threads. And I kind of do that on purpose. As I initially do the drawings, they're fine pencil lines. But then I ink them, and I ink them with a special pen that gets me close. And that's my first check if a pattern's going to work. If it works with the wide pen, then I have a pretty good idea that it's going to work with embroidery floss. But then I always do a sample so that I know for sure that it's going to work. And then I can, correct things that maybe just don't look quite right, or I decided I didn't like the line going in that direction, whatever the case may be. I do try to keep my stitches consistently spaced, and I do little stitches or wider stitches. It's up to you, and it's also kind of up to the pattern. Obviously I can't do as long of stitches around this eye. I'm going to do smaller ones. And tight curves you have to go smaller. But for the most part I'm going to do fairly consistent stitches. You don't want your stitches too long because then they look sloppy, and they can also get snagged on more things. So I usually kind of, go a little bit, at a time, and I stitch them. If you want to be really, really technical, we can actually measure it out. And one of my stitches is about 1/16 of an inch, or sorry, 1/8 of an inch for these outer lines, and it'll probably be closer to 1/16 for around this eye, if you want to be really, really technical. So that's basically how I work. One of the great things about embroidery is that you can do it pretty much anywhere. Standing, sitting, laying down in bed, doesn't really matter. As long as you have light, you have your traveling supplies, you've got your embroidery floss, your scissors, and your hoop. You can do it anywhere. During chemo treatments, while I'm hooked up to the different IV drugs that they were giving me, I was sitting in the chair stitching away, as long as I was able to keep my eyes open and my stomach in check. And it's quiet, so you can do it, when somebody else is sleeping. You can even do it on set. I have a friend, she does her embroidery projects when she's waiting for her scene to come up, but she still has to be on set for different TV jobs that she does. And it's also a very clean craft. You have to wash your hands, you have to wash the fabric. That's kind of about it. And you can stop and start at any moment, which is also nice. You don't have to wait to a good save point, for example. And you can just, secure your needle in a corner. And what I do is I actually happen to have most of my projects on a hoop that fits inside a giant freezer bag with my scissors and my embroidery cloth, and I just keep it in the project bag as I go from place to place. To make sure I keep it all together, make sure I keep it clean. So that's very handy. And it's also kind of nice that it's not like any of these supplies are going to go bad. If you don't work on it for a year, it's right exactly where you left it. You might need to restretch your fabric, but that's kind of about it. And I just make sure that I don't catch the tail of the thread too far, into my stitching. And I'm going to just go all the way around the outer edge with this particular color. And then I'll probably backtrack with the whole bind stitch and come around to here. For this part, I'm going to switch to the lighter blue and start to get that lined up. Once I get that in place, this transfer sheet isn't going to go anywhere. It's in place until I wash it away. And so from that point, and I don't have the risk of a corner peeling up, which can happen. It does occasionally, but usually if you press it down really good, you stitch around the edge, at least with a running stitch, you're good to go. Now, some people are still of the mindset that they really want to stitch certain things first, no matter what their transfer method is. Those people with one thread will just do a quick running stitch, not in the design, but around it, to keep their transfer sheet from peeling up. It's a method. I don't usually do it because I can work this way just fine. So that's basically video 2. Oh, might as well tack in this. So after I finish this sample, what I will do is I will double check and make sure I didn't miss any spots. You don't want to have any gaps in your final design. Then I'll wash it. And you don't need to use soap to wash this transfer medium out, but I usually, no matter how many times I wash my hands, and I'm not that sweaty of a person, you still end up getting a bit of a dirt ring around the edge of the fabric where the hoop kind of bumps it up, and I want to wash that out. So I'll use a little bit of gentle laundry soap, something that you would use on like baby clothing or your fine linens, or even brassieres, because they need special soap, just to get that soap, or get that dirt out. And I usually just soak the project in I have a little tub of, that I've upcycled, and I basically soak it for about 15 minutes, and then I just kind of hand wash it out or throw it into the appropriately colored laundry cycle. I then hang dry them, and I hang dry them mainly because it just is easier to get out the wrinkles than if they've been heat set in place. And then I iron them really good. I re-stretch them, and then I have to scan them and then take out any weird things that sometimes happen in the laundry or in the ironing process. Photoshop out the lint that the lint roller just can't pick up for whatever reason. I maybe add the other elements of that pattern because they don't always fit on the same piece of fabric. Sometimes I have half of one pattern set on one piece of fabric and the other half on another, and I have to kind of digitally stitch them together using the computer. And then that's also when I take my notes, because I take extensive notes as I stitch about the colors I use, if I used a fancier stitch, if there's a definite do this, you know, first and this second. I take notes on those, and I also, you know, take notes on if a line was not where I decided it should be. So then I scan in the pattern, the ink drawing, and I make those corrections, and then I color them so that you will, instead of having all gray lines or black lines like I have here, you'll have a blue line that you follow for the blue lines, and red lines for red, and so on and so forth. So it's really like stitching by color. And some people will, you know, use that for their transfer printout, which you totally can. I actually do suggest it if you get lost easy. Other people, they just want the black lines because of simplicity, or it saves them cost on printer ink. It doesn't take a lot of ink, but it does add up if you're doing a lot of projects. And then they'll just have the color line drawing next to them while they work to refer to, so they know where to put which color. Because it could get confusing if, oh, I don't know, maybe this line should be this color or that color. I don't know. And they do it one way and then they decide to go the other way. I've already tested that out, and I figured it out for you. Anyway, so then what I do is I write the instructions with all the colors that I used. You don't ever have to use the same colors I do. It just makes it nicer for you. It takes out a lot of the guesswork. And it's also great if you're a little colorblind or indecisive, or just as a starting point, like, ooh, I really like that green she used in this one, but I don't like the orange. You know, for example, I want to have magenta flowers instead. That's totally your license. You are creative too. You go for it. And then I, you know, usually have some sort of write-up about, you know, where the inspiration came from, or a funny little anecdote. There's often puns or silliness, just random silliness, because I'm a silly person who can be serious all the time, and life's too short to be serious. So I like to have fun, and my way of passing that on to you is with the silliness that comes in the write-ups. And then I take measurements of the pattern, and sometimes the patterns are multiple sizes, so I include that information for you, which not everybody does, and I can't understand that. Another thing that I do is, if it's a pattern that makes sense, because it doesn't always make sense. Some things only face one way. But if it's a pattern that makes sense, where maybe I want the whale facing that way, I will actually do a mirror image so that you can pick which way you want the whale, which is kind of cool, because then you have two whales, and you could have them swimming towards each other, you could have them kissing, you could have them swimming away from each other, and that's, you know, just one extra added value that I'd give you guys. You guys keep me doing this. The more you buy, the more I make. The more I make, the more I do. Without you guys, I would probably be on some sort of government assistance, as I still recover from my cancer treatments. You know, I always thought that when you were done with treatment, you'd be done, but you're not done. There's always residual side effects and scans, and it takes a long time sometimes to get back to normal. And you might not ever get back to normal, which is kind of scary. And you have to make an adjustment with the new normal. And I keep fighting for going back to normal, and I'm getting closer and closer, but I've still got a long ways to go. And I'm still in the all clear. I have no evidence of disease, which is the new wording for remission, which is great, and hopefully I'll stay that way for the rest of my life. Only time will tell. Until then, I keep stitching, you keep stitching, and we'll be in stitches in no time. Oh, did you catch that pun? I'm so punny. Anyways, I hope this video helps you. If you have any questions, you can always drop me a line. I'll answer them as soon as I'm able to, usually within 24 hours. I do take custom orders. I do sometimes go, hey, you know what? That is a really great idea. I'm just going to add it to my to-do list of patterns I want to create, and it'll be available as soon as I'm done stitching it. Right now it takes me about a week to go from start to finish on making a custom order for a pattern, which is, you know, not long when you consider that I am still stitching a sample. I'm putting the pattern together for you just as I do for each and every one of my patterns. And you know, that includes, you know, photos and ironing and you know, the little write-ups and everything. Another thing that my patterns actually come with, though, that you might not be aware of, is I include instructions for how to basically do any embroidery project, which includes how to, you know, stretch your fabric, how to transfer, you know, with different methods, because there are cheaper methods than using this super solvy or super washi solvy or the stick and wash away. And one of those methods is to trace it. And you can use a light box, and if you don't have a light box, you can use a window on a sunny day. You tape your drawing to the window, and then you tape your fabric to the window, and you trace it with a pencil. And then you have to use better soap or some sort of stain remover to get the pencil to remove completely if you don't end up covering up your lines precisely. But that's another way. Some people use a special pen that rubs away, which can be good on smaller designs, but maybe not so good on a really large design unless you want to kind of go back and trace over it a few times. So now that I've basically made it around the outside, I don't like to backtrack too many times, but I've decided that I want this line to be the dark blue. So I'm just going to continue on until I run out of string. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I'm still going to do that line in that color, but I'm actually going to just show you why, one of the reasons why I do the whole bun stitch. I just turn back. I'm going to do the mouth. I want to do the mouth in this color. So here we go. So as I now go back, I'm going to hit all the other lines that I didn't stitch yet until I run out of thread, and then I'll switch to the light blue and hit that belly. I'm not going to pull out another thread of blue because this is probably going to get me maybe to about here. So I'm going to save that until I get part of the belly done, so that it's tacked in place. Okay, I've said it before. I know, kind of awful here, but I think that's it for this video. Hope you're well and happy stitching.